I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who writes things down just to make sense of them. My late husband used to tease me about that. He'd say, "Harriet, you hold everything inside until it turns to stone." He wasn't wrong. For 64 years, I've been the woman who keeps the peace, who smooths things over, who smiles at the dinner table even when something underneath is cracking. But I'm writing this down because what happened at Thanksgiving this year changed something in me. Not broke it. Changed it. And I think I needed it to. I should start a little before the beginning because the beginning doesn't make sense without it. My son Spencer is 41 years old. I raised him alone after his father passed. Spencer was 16, still soft in places, still needed me in ways neither of us wanted to admit. We got through it together. I went back to work full-time at the school district, took on extra hours, made sure his senior year looked exactly the way it was supposed to. I didn't want grief to take that from him too. He grew into a good man. Mostly. That's the honest version. Mostly. When he married Lacey 8 years ago, I was happy for him. Genuinely, she was sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who walked into a room and immediately understood its geometry. I admired that about her even when it made me feel slightly off balance. I told myself that was my problem, not hers. I told myself to adjust. Over the years, I adjusted a lot. I paid for their wedding, not all of it. I want to be fair, but close to it. $62,000. My retirement savings. Partially. The venue alone was $28,000 because Lacey had always dreamed of a vineyard wedding, and I wanted my son to give his wife the wedding she dreamed of. I didn't say that out loud to either of them, not once. I just wrote the check and smiled in the photographs. 2 years after the wedding, Spencer called to tell me they'd found a house. A beautiful one, he said. 4 bedrooms, a yard for a dog they didn't have yet, in a neighborhood with good schools for children they hadn't had yet. The down payment was a problem. Could I help? I gave them $45,000. I want to be clear, I gave it, not loaned. I'm not a person who gives money and then dangles it over people's heads. I gave it freely because I love my son and I believed in their life together. I never mentioned it again after the wire transfer cleared. Then came Wren, my granddaughter. She arrived 3 years ago like a small, loud miracle. And I fell completely. I drove 4 hours each way every other weekend to spend time with her. I babysat whenever they needed, sometimes for whole weeks when Lacey had work travel and Spencer's schedule was impossible. I never complained. Wren would fall asleep on my chest and I'd sit completely still for hours just so she wouldn't wake up. I think that's when I started not noticing things I should have been noticing. Last spring, Spencer called about Thanksgiving. They wanted to host it this year, their house, their kitchen, a big family gathering. His voice had that particular brightness it gets when he's been talked into something he's now genuinely excited about. I recognized it. I said that sounded wonderful. "Mom, could you cover the food?" he asked. Just like that. Not, "Would you mind?" or "Only if it's okay." Just the assumption. Light and casual, like asking me to pass the salt. I said yes. I always say yes. The grocery list Lacey sent me 3 days later was 4 pages long. I'm not exaggerating. 4 pages, organized by category, with brand specifications. Specific brands of butter. A particular heritage turkey from a farm in Vermont that needed to be ordered 8 weeks in advance and cost $230. Specialty cheeses for an appetizer board. 3 kinds of pie from a bakery Lacey liked in their neighborhood. Not homemade, from this specific bakery, which I should pick up the Wednesday before. I spent $1,140 on Thanksgiving groceries. I drove up the Tuesday before with my car packed full. Lacey met me at the door, looked at the bags, said great, and turned back inside. Spencer was on a work call. I unloaded everything myself, put it all away in their kitchen, and then Wren came running around the corner in her socks and threw herself at my knees, and I thought, "It's fine. It's all fine. This is what I came for." Thanksgiving morning was fine, mostly. I got up early and started the turkey. I made the stuffing from scratch, the cranberry sauce the way my mother taught me. The green bean casserole Spencer has asked for every year of his adult life. Lacey's mother Denise arrived around noon with her husband Glenn. They're pleasant people. I like them. And Denise immediately offered to help in the kitchen. We fell into an easy rhythm. It was almost the holiday I'd been picturing. Around 2 in the afternoon, Lacey came into the kitchen with her phone out. "So we've been thinking about seating," she said. I was basting the turkey. I half turned toward her. "We want it to feel really intimate," she said. "Like the main table is for immediate family. Me, Spencer, my parents, my brother and his wife. And then we thought you and Rochelle." She paused. "Rochelle is my closest friend. I'd mentioned bringing her since she had nowhere to go for the holiday. We thought you two could have a really lovely setup at the little table in the sunroom." I put the basting brush down. I want to tell you exactly what I felt in that moment, because I've been trying to be precise about it ever since. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was something more disorienting than that. It was the feeling of a floor you've trusted for years suddenly giving just slightly under your foot. Not collapse, just that fraction of an inch, that whisper of wrongness. "The sunroom table," I said. "It's actually really pretty in there," Lacey said, already moving toward the refrigerator. "The light is nice in the afternoon." I heard myself say, "That's fine," before I even decided to say it. Old reflex. 40 years of smoothing things over. She left. I stood at the kitchen counter for a moment. Then Denise, who had heard the whole thing from 2 feet away, very quietly set down her peeler and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with this steady, knowing sadness. Like she'd seen this coming from a direction I hadn't been facing. I excused myself. Walked to the guest room where I'd put my bag, sat on the edge of the bed. I thought about the turkey I'd gotten up at 6 in the morning to start, the stuffing recipe my mother gave me, the one I'd been making for this family for 15 years, the $1,100, the $45,000, the $62,000, the 4-hour drives every other weekend, the weeks I'd spent here with Wren when Lacey was traveling, sleeping on this exact guest bed, waking up at 2 in the morning for bottle feedings, never once being asked. Never once being asked. I thought about the sunroom. I'm not sure how long I sat there. Long enough that I stopped shaking. Long enough to get quiet. I came back to the kitchen. Denise was still there, still peeling potatoes, and she looked up at me with a question in her face. I gave her a small nod. She nodded back. Women of a certain age understand each other across kitchens without a single word. I found Spencer in the living room. He was off his call by then, sitting on the floor with Wren, stacking blocks. I sat down beside them on the floor. Wren immediately climbed into my lap. I let her settle there for a moment. Spencer looked up at me with that face he's had since he was a boy. Open, a little oblivious, always slightly surprised that anything complicated is happening. "Spencer," I said, "I want to talk to you about the seating." He frowned. "Oh, yeah. Lacey mentioned she was going to. She told me I'd be sitting in the sunroom." He opened his mouth. Closed it. I watched something move across his face. Not quite guilt. More like the recognition of something he'd been choosing not to look at directly. "Mom, it's just, I got up at 6 this morning to start the turkey," I said, not loudly. I kept my voice entirely level. "I spent over $1,000 on this food. I drove 4 hours to be here, and I have been at this family's table for 8 Thanksgivings." He was quiet. "I'm not asking to be made a fuss of," I said. "I'm asking to sit at the table where the people I love are eating the meal I cooked." Wren had no idea what was happening. She was trying to put a block inside another block. I pressed my lips to the top of her head. Spencer put a block down. He was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, "You're right, Mom. I'm sorry. You'll sit at the main table." He said it clearly. No hedging. I nodded. I kissed Wren's head again and got up. What I didn't know was what happened after that. I was back in the kitchen when Spencer went to find Lacey. I couldn't hear everything, just the shape of voices, the particular frequency of a conversation that is not quite an argument, but is not comfortable either. Denise and I continued working. Neither of us acknowledged the sounds from the hallway. About 20 minutes later, Lacey came back into the kitchen. She didn't look at me directly. She busied herself with something at the counter and then she said, almost to the cabinets, "Spencer said you're upset about the seating." I kept my hands moving. "I spoke with Spencer, yes. I just thought the sunroom would be cozy," she said. Her voice had that particular careful lightness of someone managing themselves very deliberately. "I wasn't trying to make you feel excluded." I turned then, and I looked at her, and I let myself actually look at the controlled expression, the slightly elevated chin, the small, fixed smile. "Lacey," I said, "I paid for this food. I've helped pay for this house. I helped pay for your wedding. I don't say that to hold it over you. I gave those things freely and I meant it. But I think we both understand that cozy sunroom is not the right frame for this conversation." The kitchen was very quiet. Denise had gone very still. Lacey didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I hear you." That was all. Dinner happened. I sat at the main table. Spencer sat next to me and filled my glass first, and didn't say anything about it, but his hand rested briefly on my shoulder as he sat down. And I understood everything in that gesture that he hadn't been able to say out loud. Rochelle sat next to me on the other side, and she leaned over before the first course and said under her breath, "You doing okay?" And I said, "Better than I was," and she squeezed my hand under the table. The food was good. The turkey was perfect. Wren sat in her high chair between her parents and threw cranberry sauce and laughed at herself, and I watched her and felt the complicated mixture of things that comes with loving people who have disappointed you, because love doesn't stop. You don't just stop. You don't just stop. You just carry it differently. After dinner, when everyone had moved to the living room and the pie was out, Lacey's mother Denise found me alone in the kitchen, starting on the dishes. She picked up a dish towel and stood beside me at the sink without asking. We worked together in silence for a little while. "She's not a bad person," Denise said finally. "I want you to know I'm aware of that, and I'm also aware she doesn't always." She paused. "She didn't have the kind of mother who showed her what this looks like. I wasn't sure what to say to that." "I'm sorry," Denise said. "For what it's worth, from me to you. I'm sorry." That undid me more than the sunroom had. I had to set a dish down and breathe for a moment. "Thank you," I said. We finished the dishes together. I drove home the next morning. 4 hours. The November landscape was bare and gray, and very beautiful in that stripped-down way things get when they've shed everything unnecessary. I thought about my husband, who had been gone 12 years, and who would have known exactly what to say. Probably something dry and fond and accurate. He was good at that. I thought about Wren and how she'd pressed her forehead against the car window to watch me pull out of the driveway, one small hand flat on the glass. I thought about what I wanted the next chapter of my life to look like. Not my role in other people's chapters. My own. I had been sitting at the edges of my own life for a long time without naming it. Not the sunroom, exactly, but something like it. Making myself smaller so the space felt more comfortable for everyone else. Giving freely and quietly, and then standing at the counter wondering why I felt invisible. That's not love. Or it's not only love. Sometimes it's a habit you mistake for love. When I got home, I made myself a pot of real coffee and sat at my own kitchen table in my own house and looked out at my own backyard. The oak I planted the year my husband died, taller now than the fence line. And I thought, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm not rewriting the whole story, but I'm going to take up more space in it. A few days later, Spencer called. Not a text, a real call, which he doesn't always do. "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving," he said. "So have I said. There was a pause. "I let you down." "I didn't mean to, but I did." "Yes," I said. "You did." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you are, sweetheart. And I did know. What I need you to understand is that sorry is the beginning, not the end. I need you to actually see what's been happening. Not just this, the pattern of it. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought maybe I'd asked too much, asked too soon. Then he said, I think I've been taking the easy way out for a while. With you, especially, because you always let me. That was the most honest thing my son had said to me in years. It cracked something open between us. Not broke it, cracked it open. The way you crack a window to let the air change. Yes, I said again. I let you. We both have work to do. We talked for a long time after that. I don't need to put all of it here. Some things belong just to the two of us. What I will say is this. I am 64 years old. I have buried a husband and raised a child alone and built a life out of more hard patches than I usually talk about. I am not fragile. I was never fragile. I just spent a lot of years performing a version of myself that felt easier for everyone around me to love. I'm done performing. I still go to see Ren. I still bring the green bean casserole when I'm asked. I still answer when Spencer calls. But now when I sit down at a table, I sit at it fully. I don't make myself smaller. I don't accept the sunroom because the light is nice in the afternoon. I worked for my seat, in more ways than any of them will ever completely understand, and I intend to keep it. There's a version of this story where I stay quiet, where I carry the turkey to the table, smile through the whole meal, drive home 4 hours in the dark and tell myself it wasn't a big deal. I've lived that version before, more times than I want to count. And the thing about that version is that it costs you something every single time, not all at once. Just a little, and then a little more, until one day you're standing at a kitchen counter you paid for in a house you helped buy, and you realize you've become a guest in your own generosity. What happened at Thanksgiving didn't happen because Lacey is a cruel person. I don't believe she is. What happened because I had spent years making it easy for people not to think about what they were asking of me. I said yes when I should have said, let me think about it. I wrote checks without conditions because I thought love didn't come with conditions. I showed up and worked and gave and then stood quietly to the side, and somewhere along the way, the people I loved started to believe that was simply my nature. That I was a woman who existed to give and didn't particularly need anything in return. That's not their fault entirely. I built that. Every time I smoothed something over instead of naming it, I added another brick to that wall. Cause and effect isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a long series of small accommodations that add up to a sunroom. What I did that Thanksgiving afternoon, sitting down on the floor with Spencer, speaking calmly and directly, holding my ground without raising my voice, that wasn't something that came naturally to me. I had to find it under 64 years of habit. But it was there. It had always been there. I just hadn't needed it badly enough to reach for it until that moment. I think about the 3 things I had to call on to get through that day. The first was ethics. Knowing that what was being asked of me was wrong, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet way, that things are wrong when they go against basic dignity. You don't put the person who funded the meal in the back room. That's not a complicated moral question. Knowing that clearly, without talking myself out of it, was the first step. The second was intelligence, not book intelligence, but the kind that comes from paying attention to patterns over time. I had seen this building, the 4-page grocery list, the casual assumption, just the down payment, just the wedding, just the food. I had chosen not to name the pattern because naming it felt like conflict. But ignoring a pattern doesn't dissolve it. It just gives it more room to grow. The third was something harder to name. A kind of steadiness. The ability to feel the hurt and the disorientation and still speak in a level voice. Still choose in that moment who I wanted to be. Not reactive. Not wounded and flailing. Just clear. Spencer and I are still working through things. That phone call a few days later, that mattered. He named what he had been doing. That takes something. To say that about yourself out loud to your mother. I'm not done loving these people. I'm not done showing up. But I'm done showing up, but I'm done making myself small to make that easier. Ren is going to grow up watching how I carry myself. I want her to see a woman who knows her own worth, not because someone told her, but because she decided. That's what I want to pass on. Not the money, not the recipes. That